All right. Hello. Thank you for joining us for this book discussion of My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. So before we get into it, could we just all say our names and roles at the library? My name is Marissa. I work in the outreach department.
I'm Beth, and I'm also in the outreach department.
My name is Jacob, and I'm also in the outreach department.
I'm Elizabeth, and I'm Elizabeth, and I'm also, I'm not in the outreach department. I'm in the archives department.
I'm Lucy, and I am in the youth department.
I'm Sherlanya, and I'm an associate director.
All right. So the first thing that I really want to address with this book is why we picked it. So this is our Black Lives Matter discussion series, and Black Lives Matter grew out of a really specific context in the US about police violence against Black people. And Oyinkan Braithwaite is born in Nigeria, and she grew up going between Nigeria and Britain. So I just wanted to say that we picked it because we wanted to pick and highlight books by Black authors across genre, across time, and across the African diaspora. So my first question is really, I guess, how familiar are you all with African literature? Is there anything that surprised you about this context in Lagos, Nigeria? Lagos?
Well, first of all, I was surprised that someone could be a serial killer so freely and seemingly, you know, that would, I'm familiar. I can think of a couple authors. The one that we did, Homegoing. I don't remember. Nyagasi. And a couple others, random, but not a ton. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've read some books that take place in Nigeria, but I think this one's a little different. Like if you think of something like Half of the Yellow Sun, which is like very much focusing on the situation with Biafra, and this was just, I think it took place in Lagos, and she talked about food they ate and things that were specific to Lagos, but it wasn't a focus really necessarily on like the hardship of living there or anything. It's a big, vibrant city. That's where they live. So, and I appreciate that there were things that you put in there, like talked about foods they were eating or things that were specific to that city, but then didn't go on to necessarily explain what those were to us. It's like, if you want to know more about this, you're going to have to do the work. And I always like when writers kind of give you a little bit, but then they make you think a little harder.
Especially when it came to the different clothing that characters were wearing. I had fun Googling all those words and seeing, being able to look at images of those pieces of clothing was really interesting. But that's probably neither here nor there.
Well, no, I agree though. There was that, and there was some of the food, and so I was Googling that stuff, and it was intriguing. I thought it was fascinating. Just as like, it wasn't really centered around the story. It was just centered around more of their lives and how, but then there were deeper, things going on.
Yes, there were a lot of deep things going on. So the basic premise, as I'm sure you can tell from the title, is there's two sisters and one of them is a serial killer. So I thought another good place to start was just the relationship between the two sisters, because they have a very interesting dynamic. So what y'all think about them?
Do you guys have sisters?
I do. I am the older sister, so kind of could like maybe relate to that a little bit.
Yeah,
I have an older
sister. Two older sisters, so yeah. Sisters are sisters. I love my sisters. Sisters are sisters.
Well, there was also the aspect of their physical features, and the, you know, one being beautiful, and that, you know, that gave her a lot of credibility, and or, you know, the option to, I guess it's more like purchase, you know, she had a lot more freedom. So I don't know, that was just one of the things I thought of.
Something I think that's interesting about this is the relationship between the sisters, is that there is just this connection there that maybe can't be severed. I listened to an interview with the author, and she was saying they initially started out as friends, and she realized, like, would a friend go this far to protect another friend? At some point, there's going to be, like, maybe that's the third murder that, you know, that friend is like, I'm good. But so the sister definitely has this need to protect her younger sister, and you see where that might come out of in their childhood. But then also, I thought it was interesting, there was a couple points where the older sister Corday is thinking about the fact that they share blood, and they shared the same bloodline with their father, and what does this mean for them? How does this connect the sisters too? So I thought it was a really interesting relationship, and, like, ultimately she's just very connected to her little sister no matter what, you know.
I also was watching an interview where the author was saying not only was it, like, not enough for them to be siblings for her to protect her to this level, but they also had to have some shared trauma in their childhood, and so that was a big part of the novel. And, like, I also noticed that she was constantly told growing up, you need to protect your sister, you need to care for your sister, this is your duty in life to protect your sister. So I thought it was interesting when she gets the call that her sister is injured, and she's not concerned about the man at all, even though up till now she's been pretty concerned with his well-being, and she's just, like, shoves past him, and she's like, oh, how could I ever let this happen? Even though she just tried to commit her fourth murder, she's like, my sister, she's the most important thing to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was definitely pivotal, where earlier in the book I'd been wondering, like, does Corday even like Viola? Like, there's some pretty harsh things that she says about her, of just, like, saying she's impure, calling her a succubus, like, was really pretty harsh. Which I only have a brother, so I was like, but it seems fairly real for how sisters can say that and then still love each other.
I don't think it's harsh, though. She's a succubus. That's
being calling somebody a succubus might be a compliment, because who holds the power in the succubus relationship?
Fair point.
Now you guys are going to be like, what is going
on? Something, and this relates to the relationship between the two sisters. Like, and I'm not even too eager to say that this is a horror novel or this is a thriller. I don't think it's really either of those things, but kind of is, just because people are getting murdered. I don't know. I guess what I'm attempting to say is, because it was kind of their relationship is set against this kind of hyperbolic thing of being a murderer, being a serial killer, that allows us to look at the relationship between the two women in a different way. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Like, because it's in this giant, strange, kind of unrealistic world where murders happen, and, you know, you defend your sister in this way.
Well, I think that one of the things that heightens making you look at that relationship within the context of this novel is this. Most of us believe that we would never help a murderer, right? Most of us believe that we would never, ever do that. And here it is just taken for granted almost that that's happening. And so then it, like, makes you focus on the nature of that relationship, right?
Totally, yes.
Yeah, I kept thinking about that a lot, because I also read an article where she was talking about how they started out as friends and how she had to quickly move away from that. She was like, but even friends, you might not go that far for someone. I had thought about that a lot as it was happening. But I also wanted to go back to Shalani's point about the power in the just being a succubus, I guess. Because something that also really struck out to me as this book is often put into like crime or thriller, that so many thrillers and murder mysteries start out with the violent like brutalization of a woman. Like it's often about women being victims, even if the main characters or detectives or whoever are women. Like I even read some other article at one point about how women are just more sympathetic. So if the victim is a woman, then you like have more investment than if it was a male victim. And so I just think it's really interesting that like this book opens up with a dead body who is a male and all the victims are male.
Yeah. Yeah, and we never know that much about them except for the one Femi, I think that Cordy is starting to think about, but it's almost like they're secondary. They're not fleshed out characters, so it's not even really about the victims at all. And that's just a really interesting way also to subvert this sort of traditional thriller. You know, it's if there's any character that's being created as sympathetic, I would say it's the sisters. So that's a really different way to look at that.
One of the things I think is interesting that we don't know is like how many, like why are these the men that she chooses to murder? Because like it is clear from the context that like she's got this parade of men around all the time, right? And so it's like I wonder, I'm like, well, why these men? Right? Like, what is there something in particular these men have done that make her turn her murder on, you know, or like, and I don't know, maybe I'm looking at the wrong road there, but like that's interesting to me, especially when she wound up killing the doctor or trying to kill the doctor, right? And it's like, what makes her make that decision, right? Because there are certain, you know, there was a scene where she was like, he's just like all of the rest of them. All they want is a pretty face, you know? But she also knew her sister liked this man. There's no, like, if you and your sister are tight enough that y'all are covering murders together, you know when your sister likes somebody. He knew that she liked him, you know, and he chose to be so mean when she was trying to walk all sexy for him. And he was like, what's wrong with your walk? Come on. When we heard all of this about like how empathetic he was as a doctor and how he could make little children comfortable and how he made grandmas comfortable and how he made everybody comfortable. And then he's making that comment about his walk. Like he was a little mean in that way, I think. Like he was described as very kind, except the sister, you know, Ayula did not describe him as particularly kind. And it just makes me think about, to return to the original thing I said, what is unseen in this book? Who is seeing what in each other, right? And what don't we see that they are seeing, right? Because we don't see what makes her decide to murder, because clearly that knife is on deck, you know, and clearly she's got opportunities abound to murder these men, you know. But like Corday, who is, you know, she's the narrator, we're seeing all these things that she notices, but she chooses not to notice this. This doctor's being mean to her, you know, and maybe she chooses not to notice the ways that maybe she has hurt her sister, right? Because we see a little bit of that reflected through the doctor and through the things that the sister said to the doctor. She sees it as manipulation, but she's like not giving her sister, she may not be giving her sister full humanity either.
And I understood, and I think that when I read the book, I pronounced their names differently, so I'm going to say it wrong, but Corredi? In my head, it's Corredi. Corredi. Even when the man that she loved, by him being in love with her sister, she should have said to herself, that's not the man who I thought it was. But I think, and this is, I mean, not to be too personal, but like, if you're in a place where you have low self-esteem and you are feeling crushing on a fancy doctor who sings sweet songs to children, and, you know, you can be blind to that sort of thing. In the same way that Corday is blind to her sister being a murderer. So I kind of understood more. I see where she's at with her admiration for the doctor.
I also think Corday, like everyone else, I mean, she talks about how the fact that it's Ayola's beauty that men like, that's all they can see. But in a way, she's also falling into that too. I think, because it's like, is she excusing the doctor's behavior? Because it's like, well, he is also seduced by the beauty. And so like that, ultimately, like the beauty is the thing that's so powerful here. And it's almost like in this book, how far can she go being as beautiful as she can? Like, how many men can she murder? And it's even something that Corday is constantly thinking about, like this. So Ayola's beauty holds sway, I feel like, over everybody. And it's just interesting what she can get away with because of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I summarize the book. You know, the overlying concept was that the beauty is allowing her to get away with murder. And then, you know, in the end, they were repeating the process, right? As typical, I read several books since then, but yeah, I mean, it's all the whole process starting over and introducing another man. But I also wonder, Sherlanya, why? What would be the tipping point that would make her want to murder? Like, especially because she wasn't with the doctor that long, and there were so many other men that they implied, you know, in her life, that why those guys?
I think there's also something interesting about just the psychology that they must have grown up with, of their whole lives they're being told how they look. Like Corday, her first experience when the boys are making fun of her, it's like she knows that she's ugly, or she feels like she's ugly. They're making her feel, whether or not she actually is or not. And then constantly through her whole life, people are telling Ayola how beautiful she is. And so I think in a way it seemed like she is responding to men that's all they want from her. And especially that's all that she's been shown. Like the doctor, when Corday is asking him, why does he love her sister? He says, well, she's just so special. She's just so beautiful. And she's like, okay, he doesn't mention her laugh or her like skills as a sewer or anything else. And so how much like that must be embedded deep in their own personalities and consciousness of how society is reacting to them.
I was watching an interview with the author and then another author from South Africa, and he was saying he imagined Corday to be beautiful, and so did I. Like the description of herself that she gives, I'm like, oh well, she's obviously beautiful and just doesn't think that because of society has been telling her this her whole life. So that's how I interpreted it. Or whether, like, regardless of whether physical beauty matters, like it does obviously have a currency, but yeah, I think that like beauty is something that you tell yourself. You're like, that's a story you tell yourself.
Well, and here I think that it's important to acknowledge that Ayola's color, her skin color, was a big part of that perception of her. And that's, you know, that's a thing that will appear all over the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, they mention it several times, even to the point where the other nurses are asking if they're full sisters or not because she looks mixed. But yeah, I had been thinking about.
It's also interesting because, I mean, with the description of the features themselves, the descriptions of the features are like broad features, you know, like she doesn't have She doesn't have like loose curls. She doesn't have like thinner lips. She doesn't have a narrow nose. It's like there's a lot of symmetry, it seems, but the features themselves are broader, and the description of the skin color itself also, it's just lighter. You know what I mean? Like it's like it was like somewhere between caramel and cream, I think. And that's not even, I mean, and maybe that's coming from like an American context. Like every culture is going to have like different ways that they, sort of sit skin tone, right? For example, with Alex's dad, who is not from the United States, like I will never forget the way that he was talking about skin color. He was like, oh yeah, everyone in your family would be considered different. Your dad would be called this, and you would be called this, and your brother would be called this, and your mom would be called this. And it really made me think about how in a different way than you would than I would from reading a book, like how every culture has got its different way of categorizing these things. But a lot of times, like there's something in particular that comes to mind. And for me, when I'm thinking about what I think of when I think of mixed quote, I'm not necessarily thinking about the features in the way that they were described by this author. Aside, like she mentioned the skin tone was different, but like the other stuff felt like she was describing African features to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's also a part where I wonder if this is specifically how I'm reading it as an American, where she's talking about the drawing that the boys did of her. And she says that they drew her with lips that could belong to a gorilla. And of course, in America, I was like, that's such an extremely racist, like a horror, like a thing that just like really like I had a gut reaction to it when I read that here. And I don't know if that was just a comparison that she made, or I mean, it seemed like that's how she was interpreting the drawing, not necessarily that they drew her as that. But it didn't seem like she didn't pay a lot of attention to that word, but it definitely like was a huge like red alarm to me. But I don't know enough about the Nigerian context to know how it would be read there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a part of the book that I found, I don't want to say I found to be refreshing, but it was refreshing to read a book that it has something to do with whiteness or whiteness in America. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I don't know how to describe my reaction to it beyond that. I was just like, this is refreshing, and this is interesting. I
feel like you do see like the sisters' race in class and how they view races outside of their country. Like they call the mother calls the mistress a yellow woman, and they refer to another woman with a European nose. So like they obviously have different ways of describing these things. And then with their class, they have a house girl that they refer to just as the house girl, and she just comes in and out as the house girl. You don't know anything about her. And there are other scenes where they have privilege showing, where she gets pulled over and she's like, I could act this way or I could act this way, and which way, like whatever way I act is going to determine how this scenario goes. And that happens a couple times throughout the story.
Yeah, both class and gender, where she says that she puts on the fake broken English accent because she knows that intelligent women intimidate men like him. Even though then he kind of responded
though with that. Like when I read that, I was like, how convincing is that? You know what I mean? Like it was like within that context, does it sound the same way when Twitter bots are trying to sound like, somebody that they're not, you know what I mean? Because like your accent is, unless you were raised within a context where you are like exposed to both things or like multiple things, your accent is not going to be right, because like languages have like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rules, and that applies to accents. And so I wonder when he was like, nah, I need more money than that. Like, maybe that fake accent cost her money. You know what I mean? Maybe she's like, oh, okay, I see what this is. You think we sound like this? I'm gonna need 2,000 more. Like, we can't know that.
That's definitely how I interpreted it. Is like she tried and failed, and they were like, no, that's not gonna work out.
Yeah, which then, because that's kind of called back to at the end of the book where she's talking about how she dresses to go give testimony. She dresses in like a nice gray suit that shows her class, basically, when she's on the way to testify on behalf of her sister. And I was wondering if that would, again, help her or hurt her, depending on how the police react to her. But yeah, to go back to something that Jacob mentioned about self-esteem. So I've read this book a few times. I read it when it first came out in 2019, and then I reread it for this. And the first time when I finished reading it, I was like, yep, this is a story about two sisters, and one is beautiful and one is ugly. And then this time when I was reading it, I was like, is she ugly though? Because she really doesn't seem, there's not a lot to actually suggest that she is. She's, aside from her color, which we talked about, which is obviously a universal thing. She says that she's tall. She's almost 6 feet tall. And she has hard edges. And it's interesting how much she looks like her mother. She said this a few times, that she's almost identical to her mother, and that looking like her mom is looking at her future self. But again, how her mother was described was not like ugly, you know, and it was just like a normal 2 eyes and a mouth. And there's something where her mother was getting ready for a wedding. She's looking in the mirror and she's like unhappy with herself, despite her expensive jewelry and her clothes. But then Ayoola says like, oh, how elegant you look. And she kind of immediately like perks up and changes and becomes elegant almost. So I was thinking a lot about how their behavior and how society is reacting to them and how it's internalized.
I think if you grow up hearing your mother, who you think you look exactly like, calling herself ugly, then you're obviously going to think, wow, I must be ugly too, because we look exactly the same.
Yeah, but just to have been given a compliment by Ayoola is how I said it. You know, then it changed her opinion of herself, which I think is fairly common for the human beings.
I also think they're holding Ayoola up to be like the pinnacle of beauty. Like, you know, the very description of beauty is her. So like to get a compliment from her is to almost be like, wow, beauty told me I looked good. And also I wonder if there's that, you know, like Corday doesn't seem ugly, but is it just the constant comparison and the constant, you know, which like between sisters, that's, you know, I mean, I think whether or not someone's even saying that stuff to you between sisters, you're always going to be kind of looking and trying to calibrate that. So, you know, I just think it's like this overblown idea of Ayoola's beauty, that it's almost like a farce in a sense, like how, you know, we keep hearing about how beautiful she is. So like, look at how she gets to live life. And everything else sort of is ugly in comparison.
In relation to beauty and self-esteem, I think this book is about, in part, is about what we choose to believe about ourselves becomes the truth. So, and what we choose to believe other people are becomes the truth, regardless of what the truth is. Like Tade, the doctor, Tade chooses to believe that Ayoola is good. The man in the coma chooses to believe that there is some sort of deep connection between him and Corriday. But when you're 6 foot tall and skinny, I mean, that's the proportions of a runway model. So you can choose to think that you have the proportions of a runway model, or you can choose to think that you are ugly like your mother. And that will eventually become the truth as it is.
I think the way they present themselves too, like Corriday is very like straight-laced and wears all white scrubs and is just like constantly put together, whereas Ayula is just like constantly flamboyant in your face, always wearing outfits that she's designed, and social media is her thing, that's her job. So like they just present very differently.
Yeah, it's interesting that they really are like kind of dichotomies, two sides of the coin, and yet neither of them has friends really, like, at all. They mentioned Ayula has minions who come to her birthday party, but they're not really friends. And then like you can tell even Corriday's coworkers like don't like her.
She's mean to them.
She is. Yeah, I was going to mention when you were talking about people will believe what they tell them, what they're told, and also about the classism in relation to the custodian that got blamed for really anything, and then he got fired. But he, so there was often that kind of classism that they were stating through their disapproval of some of these folks and the kind of work they did, or their laziness.
Yeah, and his name was Mohammed, so it's
Mohammed, right?
It's easy to blame him and have it be believed that he did it.
That was interesting too. At the end of the book, she tries to call for him to come clean something up, and they're like, "You fired him." What?
Yeah.
So since Jacob mentioned Muhtar, the coma guy, just wondering what your thoughts were on their relationship.
It is the only person that Corriday ever told the truth and was ever herself around. And I think I've been pondering about, why is this character in this book? What purpose does it serve? And I think maybe a part of it is, if you are honest with somebody, even if that person is asleep and in a coma, if you're vulnerable around them and you're honest with them, that will create a positive connection between you, even if the things you're saying is that you're assisting your sister in murder. But what I can say about that is that is the one person that she was actually open with in the book.
And that couldn't see her. She was only honest with him when he was in a coma.
Yeah.
Like, beauty was off the table in that way, which I thought was interesting.
I think that one of the questions that he raises in this book, or like his presence raises in this book, is like, what do we mean when we talk about love, right? Because like there's like all these ideas that come with like familial love, right? Like there's like, what does sisterly love look like? What does love within a family look like? What does love within another kind of family look like, right? Because like his family is like real quick to want him to die so they can just have his stuff. That's how I read that. And they weren't coming to see him and things like that. She did come to see him. And if love is a verb, right, like recognizing like he is still alive, okay, like he needs these exercises, blah 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 blah, and then he challenges her, in that regard, like, hey, can we keep in touch? I mean, because she did talk to him, she did not just go through the paces, she like did all of the things, and his family didn't, and they got so mad at her for that, right? And so I think it makes you pull at that question, like, what does it mean to love somebody, and like what are the different ways that action is shown, I guess.
It's about showing up. As simple as showing up. She showed up.
Yeah. It's an interesting tension too between like her position as a nurse and getting promoted to head nurse and providing all this care, and then the other side is her cleaning up after her sister who's committing these horrible acts. And she kind of tries to separate herself morally, and then in the end she's like, her sister says, you have to stop sitting on the fence, you have to choose a side. So she chooses a side.
I hate this term, but I don't have a better one, because I think Muhtar also showed a lot of her daddy issues, for lack of a better term, because we haven't really gotten into her father, but she had a rough childhood. He was abusive. Her and her sister had a lot of trauma that they're working through. And Muhtar's, I don't know if he's the same age as her father, but he's old enough where he could be her father. Like, I think his kids come and they're kind of her age. And how he is the only one that she really is open and vulnerable with, who is also kind of somewhat of a semi-father figure, maybe.
I think just continuing off what I just said, of like, she made her choice, and when she makes that choice, she burns the piece of paper that has his phone number. So she makes a conscious decision to like cut herself off from that relationship where she felt cared for and like had that father figure, if he is that, which I think he could be.
Sorry, and also the relationship where she betrayed her sister.
Yeah, because he's the only one that knows, and she says, someone, I don't know if I should tell her that someone is out there that knows her secret, knows our secret.
She also has a notebook that they mentioned one time, that she writes down this is the third one. She writes him in the notebook. Mm-hmm. And then that's never brought up again. And it's just I kind of like have this question, like, notebook, where'd it go? You know, and that's there, that's a record. But you know, so that's, besides severing that relationship with Muhtar, there's still that notebook out there somewhere. That's not related to this, just thinking about it.
The notebook is like related to when she was told, like, well, there's something wrong with your sister, but you're worse. Because like when we think about what like, I think that within popular culture, when you think about a serial killer, you think about the trophies that they keep. And she's the one keeping the trophies, right? So here's this, they are like a symbiotic serial killing team, because her sister can't kill again without like the precision cleanup. And that her sister is also like the keeper of the trophy, right? And so I think that like, I hear you about like, because like you see the notebook appear and you're like, oh, that's going to be the downfall. Because like all of these, you know, and even when Femi's sister shows up and is like, what's up with you? It's like, oh, there's a notebook too. Like, how is this gonna go down? But I felt like when, you know, when she was told like, what's wrong with you? Like, I felt like that was like a counterweight in some ways to the fact that this notebook is there, because she is 100% like in it.
Yeah, I don't think like the murders obviously wouldn't have been successfully covered up without her. Her sister would have been caught. Whether or not she would have been prosecuted, like, it's unclear, because obviously her beauty has a huge sway on people. I don't know how that, if that can get you out.
I want to think about the beauty a little bit more. Like, I wonder if like one of the powers of the beauty is that like people don't expect anything else from her. And so like if you're expecting someone to be dumber than they are, you can 100% get away with extra stuff. You know what I mean? Like, because no one would even think that you have, like, if somebody thinks you have nothing going on upstairs, like people will say stuff in front of you that they probably otherwise wouldn't. People leave themselves open to you in ways that they wouldn't. And that's you know, it's like that's like the cousin of the beauty almost, because it's enabling. It's not the beauty itself. It's not like somebody's like, here, take this because you're beautiful. They're just like, I don't have to worry about any of this because like clearly beautiful people are dumb. So like, I'm not going to take any of the precautions that I would take under, you know, normal circumstances.
And I also think that Iola would not have been able to get away with what she got away with if she wasn't also intelligent. And she's many different kinds of intelligence. She's emotionally intelligent. She's socially intelligent. She moves people around like pieces on a chessboard. And perhaps her beauty allows her to do those things as well. But I think it should also be said that she has some evil genius intelligence stuff going on too. It's not
Or she's-
just
or like another way to think about it is like she is simply aware of the tools that are available to her. She's very good at using all of the tools that are available to her, right? Like she's very good at using social media. She's very good at sewing. She's very good at financing what she needs to finance, and she's very good at like understanding what the tool of her beauty can get her.
Maybe part of the reason she's even like killing these people is, and I'm just thinking this now, is to be like, I am much more than a pretty face. You know, you have underestimated me, and that's going to cost you. You know, it's just like, if you've constantly
vanity, I'm taking yours.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you've constantly been told that your value lies in your beauty, like maybe in some way, you know, you want to prove that there's more to it. She just picks an extreme route.
And I wonder also if it ties back to like when she was a child, her father has the chief over, and he like wants to touch her with his cane to like mark her as his territory because she's beautiful. And Corey Day is like, our father never really like cared or noticed our beauty probably until that moment, and then it became a currency that he could use to get things that he wanted. And she does use his knife to murder, so it seems tied back to that.
Well, and you sort of see like we see that as a family trait in that moment too, because the aunt was like, oh, I'll protect her. The aunt is like all on top of that, right? And the aunt is about like leveraging all of the resources that she's able to too, right? So like we see like a genealogy of, you know, of that willingness to like ruthlessly bargain in that way. So like in addition to the violence, right? So like we see like the genealogy of the violence with, you know, with the dad and with the daughters and how they work together, but then through the aunt and the dad, we see the genealogy of a certain level of ruthlessness. And maybe even like a willing blindness, right? Because we see the mom, you know, once she got disrespected by the dad bringing a woman to their marital home, being like, you know what? I think Ambien's the ticket to just not seeing the things that I don't need to see.
Yeah, trauma is definitely a through line in this book in so many ways. And just how they both react to it too, of like, there is something that they're both trying to regain control of. And Corday is obviously like obsessively cleaning everything. She uses that as sort of like stress relief, and dating men is Ayula has a lot of control in those relationships.
Yeah, it's interesting as like a form of control because yeah, Corey Day is the cleaner and Ayula's like wants to assert her control over people, specifically men.
It's also just go ahead.
I think that Corday also exerts control by keeping people at a distance. You know, she's not being mean to people. I think that she is being mean to people to keep people way out there. She cannot stand it when she's like, oh geez, this person is here trying to figure out what's going on. People didn't even know she had a sister. Like this distancing that she's doing is also one of the ways that she keeps control.
I also think it's interesting that we all here have been talking about how Ayula has a lot of emotional intelligence and is very smart at relationships. I think a common refrain that I read from reviews was like, yeah, Ayula is this sociopath or this psychopath, just killing indiscriminately and has no feelings and is, you know, an animal and all this stuff. And which I think is sort of an oversimplification that I think we do see a lot of her smarts. And I think one of the evidences that I saw online when people were talking about, oh, she's a sociopath, is she doesn't know how to use social media. I was like, does anyone know how to use social media? Like, Corday has to keep saying like it's too soon to post that kind of thing. You're like, Femi just went missing, you can't post that yet. But people do all kinds of weird stuff on social media. And I think it was an interesting choice that I really liked to just include social media. Like so many modern books don't either don't address it, or, you know, there's some excuse for why you don't have your phone or something like that. Thought this handled it really interestingly.
Yeah, I mean, I think her using it incorrectly is actually very like spot on. I mean, I think part of the thing with social media is people forget what's appropriate and forget how much to share, like what they can share and when they can share. And that's like filters. I mean, it's, you know, you put your own filters on it, but like the filters you should have in your brain that keep you from sharing things, I think those start to dissipate a little bit with social media. So I don't think that she's bad at using social media. I think she's using it, as you're saying, Marissa, in the same way that everyone uses it.
I think she was using it honestly, because within the context of like how her situation was set up, these men, they weren't anything really to her. She was nothing to them aside from like, I don't know, belt buckle, hat, you know, beautiful girl. And she understood that, and she was engaged in a transaction with them. And then she behaved accordingly. You know what I mean? Like these men were never fully human to her. You know, she's like, oh, yeah, I'm not human to them. They're not human to me. Yeah. And I think that her use of social media matched up with the reality of the relationship she had. Because it's none of the relationships seem to have been very long, right? Even like Femi, that was not a long relationship.
I think Corriday is like, that's how she views the men too. Like they're nothing, their lives don't matter. And then she has like this connection with Femi when she sees him for the first time, and then she starts reading his poetry. And I almost wonder, like when they took his stuff down, that may have made it all the easier for her to just forget and move on, because it's like this presence that was looming above her, like this life that was taken that shouldn't have been taken, like was a beautiful poet and all this. It really affected her and her stance on what they were doing.
And I saw that as Corday like bending over backwards to prove that these men were deep or didn't deserve it, in a way, where Ayula sees them kind of for what they are. Like, no, they just wanted a pretty face too, even with like the doctor who Corday's like, no, he's deep, he sings to children. And then is proven wrong eventually. And we don't really see Femi alive, but it's kind of a similar thing. Like he's dead, but she still is like bending over back. Like he writes poetry, he's so deep. He probably has, you know, I don't know. She's making up this personality for him.
What's the word? Projection. She's projecting.
That's it. Yeah.
Onto, okay.
Are there any other burning things that you noticed that we haven't talked about yet?
So you guys all sort of talked about different things that you read about this book. How did the reviews strike you? Because the reviews struck me funny sometimes. So I'm just wondering if other people had similar experience.
I didn't read a ton of the reviews, but and I didn't know anything about the book until I started reading it. But I thought it was funny, really. I mean, a lot of it, it was tongue in cheek, and it was kind of, I mean, considering it's about murder, it was kind of light, you know, lilting sort of talk and you know, dialogue, and you know, some of it got deep, but you know, I don't know if that makes sense, but it was kind of humorous. So.
Sure, Lanya, what about the reviews made you giggle?
I don't know, like there was one where there was like a and I guess let's say reviews and articles, but there was one where someone was asking her like, oh, well, some people are saying that this is a feminist text. What do you think about that? And it's just like, does everything have to be a feminist text? Like what is that? Or like, oh, the book was darkly humorous. It's like, well, what does darkly humorous really mean? Like, I don't understand what you mean when you're saying that. I don't know. They were just, and I don't know how much of that was, like we are reading this within the context of like a Black Lives Matter discussion series, right? And so like, that's going to put me in a headspace automatically where I'm thinking about, where race intersects the text, where I'm thinking about how race intersects the perception of the text, right? And so maybe I wouldn't have even had questions about certain things that I read if I weren't thinking about it in this context. I don't know, like.
Yeah, I was, some of the reviews I saw, like there was just a lot of like, it's a roller coaster ride of, like you're saying, dark humor. And so I listened to some interviews with her because I was like, I want to hear more about what she was thinking. And like, she wrote this book in a month. I think it was a fever dream of just, and what she said was that she wrote it for herself. Like, and she was sort of just looking basically first off at beauty and what can you get away with? And that I'm not sure she had expectations that it would go where it went. So I think like to be asked those questions, like, is this a feminist text or do you, it's just like, I'm not sure. It didn't seem like from one of the interviews I was listening to that was even what she was putting on it initially. She just kind of, the story came out of her and she doesn't even give you the whole story. She's brief with her words and she doesn't fill in all the details. And then there's some details like the notebook or this chair that Corey talks about burning a chair and one part, and that's it. So it's just like hearing her say that, I could put that to what I'd read. Like, yes, this just very much came from this woman's head, this story she created in this month. So I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. In one of the interviews, she said someone asked her about the patriarchy and how that impacted the story. And she said that she didn't really consider that at all. But like the patriarchy is so inevitably present in the story with the father and everything with the men and the beauty and the romance and all that. Like it's just there, but it wasn't something that she was consciously trying to write in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just appreciated this is just kind of a fun book. You can, obviously there's a lot that we talked about that you can dive even deeper into, like the trauma and the father and what does the knife represent and all this stuff. But so one of the reviews that I really liked was written by a Nigerian, and they made the point that this is just a fun read. And that's what I want. I don't read other Nigerian authors frequently because it's always about, the history of Nigeria and colonization, or it's about our civil war and all this misery. And sometimes I don't want to engage with that. And so here's a book by a Nigerian, which is just fun. That's all I can. It doesn't have to be a lot more than that, really. Well, we're at almost an hour, so unless anybody has any burning final thought, that's probably a good place to wrap it up.
I just
wanted to say, no, go ahead, Beth.
I wondered if any one of you have recommended it to patrons, like who are looking for a certain genre. Like I since I had just finished it, someone was looking for like family sagas. I mean, I know it's not a family saga, but it kind of has elements of it, and so I threw that on there, and I was imagining that she was maybe going to call us back and wondering why the heck I put it on her cartridge. But anyway, have any of you?
I bought a copy and sent it to my sister.
Oh, there you go.
Love that. All right, well, thank you for joining us for this discussion of My Sister the Serial Killer, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.